Alrighty, guys, here we are in stage 17 of Cambridge Latin, and this stage is based around the city of Alexandria, which is in right near the delta, so the western side of the delta of the Nile Delta, so North Africa. Now, this video is going to cover the model sentences in stage 17. There's only a couple of main translations, so this will be a fairly short series of videos on this chapter. Alrighty, so let's jump into it. Alexandria magnum portum habet, prope portum est insula. So Alexandria has a large port, right? So a port as in a place where ships come in. This is a present tense verb, and Alexandria is the name of the city. Notice most of the city names, so pretty much all city names in Latin are feminine. So Alexandria, Roma. Right? Near the port is an island, right? So we get the word insular from insula. Right? So insular is usually, or like the word insulated means separate from something else. It comes from the word for island. All right. Facila est navibus ad portum pervenere quod in ac insula est parus ingens. So we know this construction, neuter adjective plus est plus infinitive plus a dative of reference. Okay, so it is easy for ships to arrive or to come to the port. All right, so this is a dative plural right there. All right, because on this island is a large lighthouse. So the Pharos was a huge, magnificently large lighthouse. One of the really a wonder of the ancient world was this lighthouse. It was so big, and it was used to direct ships safely into this harbor, which was a tremendously good harbor and one of the main harbors of the ancient world. So the Pharos. So we notice that quod is a causal clause. It's not going to be a relative clause because there's really no antecedent. There's no neuter antecedent that's right before this, which we could be referring back to. All right. Multae naves in portu Alexandriae sunt. There are, right? So there are sunt many ships, multae naves, in the port of Alexandria. So there's a couple things that I want to point out with this sentence. So first of all, that the word for ship, navis, is feminine. We can tell that because multi is feminine, modifying it. In portu, so portus is it's a fourth declension noun. We've seen it before, and so we can tell in the ablative it's going to have a u rather than what we might expect to be a long a long o, or an e. So fourth declension is going to have that long u. And then Alexandriae is the new case that we've learned for this stage, and that is the genitive case. Now remember that genitive is the of case, so it is in the port of Alexandria. So it is Alexandria's port. All right. So reasonably speaking, you could also translate this as there are many ships in Alexandria's port, in the same way that you could say there are many ships in the port of Alexandria. Both are perfectly good translations. All right, Alexandria est urbs turbulenta, engens turba, semper urbem complet. So Alexandria is a turbulent city. It's an unruly city. A huge crowd always is filling the city. Semper is an adverb there. And notice that all of these nouns are in the present tense. Not nouns, all the verbs are in the present tense. Multi mercatores per vias ambulant. Many merchants walk through the streets. Okay, per takes an accusative of extent. Multi servi per urbem currunt. Many slaves run through the city. Multi milites per vias urbis procedunt. So many soldiers proceed or go through the streets of the city. Okay, so we have, remember, milites, third declension is modified by the second declension adjective. They're both masculine, though. Orbis is genitive, so it comes from orbs, third declension, orbs orbis, and it is modifying. It is vias, so the city streets or the streets of the cities. Sorry, no, the streets of the city. It is a genitive singular, pardon me. Milites Romani orbem custodiunt. So Roman soldiers guard the city. All right. Postquam ad orbem pervenimus, templum vidimus. Okay, so we've shifted into perfect tense verbs. These are second person plural, so we. So after we arrived at the city, we saw a temple. Ad hoc templum quod Augustus Caesar aedificaverat festinivimus. Festinavimus, pardon me, mispronounced that. All right, so towards this temple, towards this temple, which Augustus Caesar had built, we hurried. All right, so a couple things here. Hoc is a relative pronoun. Pardon me, it's a demonstrative pronoun, not a relative pronoun. So it's this, it's a demonstrative pronoun. Quod is a relative pronoun. So it does not mean because. Notice that at first I was tempted to translate that as because. It means which. We can tell because templum is a neuter noun. And so the relative pronoun quod is also neuter, and it's referring back to it. So it's describing this temple. The temple, what temple is it? The temple which Augustus Caesar had built. And quod right here, even though it's neuter, and you can't tell whether it's nominative or accusative, it is going to be accusative because Augustus Caesar is the subject, aedificaverat is the verb, and quod is the direct object. Okay. Also, aedificaverat is a pluperfect tense verb, so that's the tense that we learned in the previous stage. So the temple which Augustus Caesar had built. And then festinavimus is perfect tense. So we hurried, we hastened. So we hastened towards this temple which Augustus Caesar had built. Pro templo Caesaris erat ara. Ego vidum in aram fundi. All right, so pro is a preposition that takes the ablative. We haven't really seen it before, but it means in front of. It means in front of or on behalf of. In this case, it's going to be spatially in front of. So in front of the temple of Caesar. This is a genitive singular. So Caesar, Caesaris, third declension. In front of the temple of Caesar was an altar. So we can translate this just as easily as there was an altar in front of the temple of Caesar. I poured wine onto the altar. So notice that in plus accusative here can mean onto as well as it can mean into. You have to put that into the context of the sentence of how you translate it. So I poured wine onto the altar. This is what's called a libation. This is a type of offering that you would give. All right. And fudi is a perfect tense verb. Prope anc urbem habitabat barbilus vir dives. So near this city, Barbilus, a rich man, was living. So dives means wealthy. So this whole phrase vir dives is in apposition to Barbilus, and habitabat is an imperfect tense verb. So Barbilus, a rich man, was living near the city. Barbilus negotium cum patre meo saepe agebat. Barbilus often was doing business with my father. So to saepe is an adverb, means often, whereas semper means always. Agebat negotium. This is so ago negotium is an idiomatic phrase. It means to drive business, but we translate it as to do business or to conduct business. So negotium is where we get the word negotiation from, and it is the opposite of the Roman word otium, which means relaxation or leisure. It's the opposite of business, and this is also a word that we have in English, otium. Cum is a preposition. It's taking these ablatives right here. cum patre meo, and meo is a possessive pronoun, so it's with my father. So Barbilus often did business with my father. Notice that I translated it as did. You can also translate it as was doing since it's imperfect. Wilam splendidim habebat. So he had a splendid house. So he had a splendid house, or he was having a splendid house. It's imperfect. Ad Wilam Barbili mox perveni. Soon I arrived at the house of Barbilus. So Barbili is second declension, and that's the second declension genitive form, Barbili. Notice that the second declension genitive is Barbili. The first declension of genitive is an AE, and the third declension is going to be IS, so is. So we've seen urbis or Caesaris. Facila erat mihi Wilam in veneri. Okay, so same construction, neuter adjective, form of sum, infinitive, direct object, dative of reference. So it was easy for me to find the house. Notice erat is imperfect. Quod Barbilus erat vir notissimus. Because Barbilus was a very well-known man. This is a superlative adjective. Barbilus multos servos habebat, ego nullos. So Barbilus had many slaves. I had none. I had no slaves. So we've got a couple things going on here. So habebat is imperfect, so was having or had. Multos servos is the direct object. Ego nullos. Notice there's no verb here, so we're going to reuse the verb habeo. So habebam, ego habebam. I had nullos servos. I had no slaves. Notice that there's no word for slave there. So nullos is just an adjective being used. It's being used by itself. When you use an adjective by itself, it's called being used substantively. So it's called a substantive adjective. So we would translate this as Barbilus had many slaves, I had none. Decorum est tibi servum Aegyptium habere. And this is that same construction of neuter adjective plus est plus infinitive plus accusative direct object plus dative of reference. So it is right for you to have an Egyptian slave. Inquit Barbilus, said Barbilus. Inter servus Barbili erat puer Aegyptius. So among the slaves of Barbilus was an Egyptian boy. So Barbili is again that genitive. So among Barbilus' slaves, there was an Egyptian boy. Aegyptius, notice that when something is turned into an adjective, there often will be an I in it. So Aegyptus is the noun for Egypt, but Aegyptius is the noun meaning, or the adjective meaning Egyptian. So if you have someone who is named, for example, after Dionysus, so it would be a Dionysios. So you add that I in there. And that's a way to identify adjectives easily. Barbilus vir benignus mihi unc puerum dedit. So Barbilus, the very, very kind or generous man, gave this boy to me. So Barbilus, the very kind or generous man, gave this boy to me. So dated is a perfect tense verb. Puerum is the direct object. Unc is the demonstrative pronoun describing puerum, and mihi is the indirect object. And vir benignus is an appositional phrase describing Barbilus. All right, so that is all we have in terms of our model sentences. We will go into our first extensive translation next.